All right. Well, once upon a time, IO psychology had no personality. Literally. In fact, personality had a near-death experience across all of psychology in the 70s with chilling critiques and hostile attacks of the very concept during the rise of social psychology and its emphasis on situational determinants of behavior. And yet, here we are, half a century later, and look at this conference, right? Personality has been one of the hottest, fastest growing topics at PSYOP since I started attending in 1995. And it's easy to take this for granted now. But the fact that personality theory, research, and application is so vibrant today is, in no small part, thanks to the clear thinking, phenomenal perseverance, and maniacal conviction of Bob Hogan. That's not to say he did this single-handedly. But if we take Dr. Hogan out of the equation, personality would almost certainly not be where it is today. For that reason alone, he is a most deserving recipient of the esteemed Dunnette Prize. We all know Dr. Hogan's enormous contributions to applied personality psychology. Most visibly, his suite of assessments is the gold standard for validity and is used for personnel selection, leadership development, team building, and thousands of organizations and corporations. In fact, Hogan assessment systems could put up one of those McDonald's billboards, over 10 million served. No kidding, over 10 million assessments and counting. Thanks to Dr. Hogan, you might hear corporate executives refer to the bright side, the dark side, and the inside of personality. Talk about influence. One of my executive teams actually uses phrase like, whoa, the bold quotient is getting in the red zone here, or is that a convicted yes or a high leisurely yes? We also know that Hogan's theoretical contributions, for instance, showing how faking and the response set controversy was misguided from the get-go. As he explained, faking good is actually valid variance and core to social skill. Or the crucial distinction between personality viewed from the perspective of the observer as contrasted with the actor. As he likes to say, there's the you that you know, and there's the you that we know. And I like to add that it's advantageous for these two people to know each other. He has also illustrated the distinction between prediction and explanation. Meta-analyses demonstrate conclusively that personality predicts job performance, turnover, leadership, and career outcomes. And Hogan's socioanalytic theory can explain why, in terms of differences in people's ability to get ahead, get along, and find some measure of meaning and purpose in it all. Bob and his late wife, Joyce, were among the original social justice warriors. And this is where his many passions came together. They founded Hogan Assessment Systems because personality assessments predict job performance, but don't discriminate against underrepresented groups like intelligence tests do. Personality testing provides a much more fair and just basis for hiring decisions. The other passion here is Hogan's obsession with leadership. You may not know this, but he paid for his college through the Naval Reserve Officer Training Corps. So after completing his undergraduate studies, he spent 3 years at sea, where he was a distinguished leader and even received a letter of commendation from the Secretary of the Navy. This earned resentment from his fellow officers, mostly privileged, higher-class young men who took exception to the way Hogan outperformed them by treating his sailors as respected equals. He learned hard lessons about real leadership, as well as class warfare. He quarreled often with his peers. Some things don't change. So many years later, after playing a central role in the revival of personality, he turned his attention to leadership. Like his work in personality, he reinvigorated the field of leadership studies and applications. This work has raised awareness of the astonishing amount of bad leadership in the world. To Hogan, leadership is necessarily a moral subject, and bad leaders perpetrate great misery for people who are just trying to do their jobs and earn a living. In addition to his personal contributions, his personality and leadership, it's important to recognize his influence in giving a helping hand to budding psychologists. I could name any number of legends in the field or current rock stars and the next generation of leading lights who have greatly benefited from his support. But that would take a while to name them all, and I'm already running long. The point is, Hogan has been a generous mentor and collaborator, often working with up-and-coming professionals to help establish their views and credentials. Of his nearly 200 publications, only a handful are authored solely by himself. He truly gets that leadership takes more than a leader. It takes a team of like-minded individuals united in a common cause, empowered with vision, support, and opportunity. It's hard to imagine any other single individual who has done more to save personality and leadership from extinction and gain mainstream acceptance, from academics to CEOs. So with that, I'll turn it over to the Danette Prize winner himself to hear what he has to say. I bet you there's no fads, fashion, or folderol.
I'm pretty impressed by that. Folks, I should tell you, I've known young Kaiser since for 20 years at least, and we've collaborated on a number of projects, and I can tell you, if you have a project you want to get done, call him. He's the best collaborator I've ever worked with him. I've ever worked. He's also highly productive. He has 150 articles, chapters, and books, and he's the author of a really great 360 with a cunning Aristotelian scoring logic, and he's just a great guy. I appreciate the comment. I also, he said, knew Marvin Dunnette pretty well. We met for the first time his little book on personnel selection was probably the best thing I read in graduate school. Can you all hear me? Best thing I read in graduate school. And he came to Berkeley in 1966, Christmas 1966, with Rich Harvey and Lowell Hellervich to visit young assistant professor John Campbell, and we had a long chat at the institute where I worked. We got along very well. We both have a background in the military. We both had a background in engineering. We're both interested in using data to solve practical problems, and we both had a lot of distance on academic nonsense. You may be familiar with this American Psychologist paper called Fads, Fashions, and Folderol. I couldn't have agreed with it more. So I think, yeah, this is probably okay. Moving right along. So I am an absolute nut on the subject of leadership. I think leadership is the most important problem in human affairs, full stop. When I first started studying leadership back in the day, so when good leadership's in place, organizations win, people prosper, economies thrive, culture blooms. When bad leadership's in place, things fall apart and everybody suffers. And if you imagine this, a map of the world right there, and you're blindfolded here and you throw a dart at the map of the world, you have 7 chances out of 10 of landing on a failed state. So mostly things are, not, and it's all about leadership. So how are things going? Well, Gallup reports, has been reporting for years, about 65% of the world's workforce are alienated. 65 to 75% of the workforce, whenever you do the research, say the worst, the most stressful, the most awful part of their life is their immediate boss. 20% of the Baltimore workforce says they fantasize daily about killing their boss. 65 to 75% of the workforce say they would take a pay cut if someone would fire their boss. And 100% of the workforce say they have worked. Every employed adult has spent some significant time working for an intolerable boss, not a bad one, an intolerable boss. So in year 2000, I was invited to SOP to give a talk. It was introduced by David Campbell of CCL fame. It was a room about 3 times this size. There was about 350 people. It was just absolutely lined. This is all suits. Back in the day, there were suits, lots of suits, all consultants. And so I said, what do you, this is 2000, so this is 22 years ago. I said, what do you think the base rate of incompetent management in corporate America might be? And the person over here said 1%. I said, what's the base rate of incompetent management? He said 2%, 6%. And I said, what would you say if I told you it's between 65 and 75%? And the room erupted, just erupted. Like, there was a wave of air from the back of the room. They're shaking their, it was great. They're shaking their fists at me. And I said, you're a bunch of whores. You take money from organizations to tell them what they want to hear. That's when I became the Antichrist of PSYOP. So how is, the problem is, has to do, so the study, so my overall line is the academic study of leadership's failed. And it's failed because of the way that the way researchers define leadership. Typically defined in terms of the people who are at the tops of organizations. But who gets to the top of large, hierarchical, bureaucratic, male-dominated organizations? Politicians, who may or may not have talent for leadership. They're people who win the fight with the board, and they get to the top. So 2/3 of current CEOs are going to fail. That's the base rate of failure is just quite constant. So the accepted definition of leadership is clearly wrong. Popular press, these two guys, Jack Welch and Jeffrey Immelt, two guys who ruined GE. Fortune magazine named Jack Welch the manager of the century in 1990. His staff, Fortune magazine named him manager of the century. His staff called him Neutron Jack. Wherever he stepped, no grass would ever grow again. So anyway, being at the top is not equivalent to being a leader. So what do practitioners think? So academic study of leadership failed because they can't tell you what a good one is. You search in vain through the literature to see what's an effective, they can't tell you. What do practitioners, what do real people think about the product, the end product of all this research? This. Real people pay no attention at all to transformational leadership. Okay. So if the mainstream of research has gone in the wrong direction, what else is available? Academics study the corporate elite in order to understand leadership. My background is actually in clinical psychology, which is applications. Freud and Piaget studied errors in order to understand normal functioning, and I said one day, why not study bad leadership in order to understand good leadership? And that's what the first question is, how much of it is, and the answer is there's a lot of it. So he said, it's time for some thinking outside the box, or at least outside the mainstream. What my friend John Holland, where do you go for outside the box thinking? You can't look in the academic literature because the journal system is designed to squeeze out any creativity or imagination or innovation. So you have to go to what John Holland called the fugitive literature, and that's what I'm going to do. I have 4 examples from the fugitive literature that dramatically shaped my thinking, totally shaped my thinking about leadership. First was this book. I used to use this as a textbook in my graduate course, Psychology of Military Incompetence by a guy named Norman Dixon. It's a really interesting read. He studies 10 notorious and really consequential, catastrophic military disasters, and he shows in each case the disaster is a direct consequence of the leadership of the commanding officer. So one after another, and I tell you, reading these things is absolutely heartbreaking. I mean, the kind of suffering and agony these guys, with their incompetence, perpetrated on the troops. It's always the troops. It's always the working class that suffers from these guys. So they all, and he concludes, he was a historian, not a psychologist, but he concluded that in each case the problem was the personality of the commanding officer. And if you read his description of these guys, you begin to see that it's just standard categories of narcissism, paranoia, risk aversion, micromanagement, and so forth. Immediately, that's what jumped out at me was, boom, these guys are failing for reasons associated with flawed personalities. The next paper that really influenced me was Hertzberg's 1968 Harvard Business Review. It's the most requested paper in the history of Harvard Business Review until fairly recently. Most people don't know what that paper says, including Hertzberg himself, actually. He studied how to improve employee motivation and how to not destroy employee motivation. And he was 2 separate questions. First thing he found, and this is a standard finding, 65% of the workers in his research were alienated. They hated their bosses. 65%, that's just a base rate number. He was able to improve worker motivation by firing bad managers, not by giving employees an opportunity to self-actualize. So it was getting rid of the bad managers is what fixed the employee motivation. So there it is, yeah. So anyway, most people miss the point of that paper. They think it's about self-actualization. It's about firing bad managers, of which there are a bunch. The third paper that really got me going was John Bent's study. This was an APA proceedings from when APA was out in LA back when PSYOP was still part of APA. It's published as part of the proceedings. It's an unpublished paper. It's a big 100-page paper. It's really good. He was in charge of, basically, he was VP for research at Sears in the 70s. He hired all new managers using a really nice assessment battery of IQ and bright side personality. Hired hundreds of these guys. All of the new managers, everyone who came in the door was smart and socially skilled. They were, bright, attractive young people. 65% of them were fired. They failed. There's the base rate. 65% failed. And he was a really interesting. I liked him a lot. Then his next step was to classify the reasons for their failure, and he finds 11 categories of failure. And I read that the first time. I said, geez, I have a background in clinical psychology. I said, that sounds just like the DSM-4 Axis 2 personality disorders, just like that. So there's something there. Anyway, so the reasons these guys failed were bad judgment, narcissism, paranoia, micromanagement, blah, blah, blah. So he gave a talk at CCL, according to Rob Kaiser, and Morgan McCall and Michael Lombardo were at the talk, and they were creative geniuses themselves. And they said they were going to replicate Bentz's study. So they did this. And they studied, compared successful and failed executives in 20 different organizations. The book is kind of a, anyway, but it replicates Bentz quite nicely. All the executives in their study, all of them were bright, socially skilled, and had successful track records up to that point in their careers. 65% of them failed. Boom, on the floor. They all failed for the same reasons that business managers failed, which were 11 categories: narcissism, paranoia, mischief, psychopathy, micromanagement, and so forth. So there you go. So based on all of that, summarizing the fugitive literature, what can you say? You can say companies hire managers based on experience, intelligence, social poise, interviews, background, and about 65% of them are going to fail. The reasons they fail can be placed in about 11 categories pretty nicely. I mean, pretty robust taxonomy of failure. The reasons they fail are not visible during the hiring process. You won't see it. And so we developed a way of assessing those categories, which we call the HDI. It actually was the Hogan Dark Side, but couldn't, so we call it the Hogan Development Survey. And we've studied over 1 million managers, and the following are the lessons learned from 1 million managers and 20 years of research with the HDS. These are the 5 things we've learned, and now we're done. We can leave. So those are the things we've learned. So first of all, lesson 1, the bright side and the dark side. Oops, sorry. I can do this. Even I can do this. This is a distinction I got from Irving Goffman. He talks about front stage and backstage behavior. So bright side and dark side behavior. People's behavior depends on whether they're on stage or off stage. Bright side concerns when you're on stage and you're paying attention to feedback and you care what people think. The dark side concerns people's behavior when they're off stage or when they don't care what people think. When they just stop trying and they stop playing the game, as it were. You see the bright side in a job interview. You see the bright side on a first date. You see the dark side when they come to work. You see the dark side after you've married them. Unfortunately. Huh? Oh, yeah, so where does it all come from? People develop dark side behaviors because it works for them. During interaction, they get their way. It allows them to win in single interactions. So it's a tactical behavior, not a strategic behavior. It's winning the one-offs one at a time. Some dark side behavior is defensive, to avoid being criticized. But mostly it's about trying to control other people through seduction, aggression, or ingratiation. So, but there's a strong manipulative intent to all these dark side behaviors. It's about getting your way and controlling people. Dark side behavior, there it is, concerns short-term wins and long-term problems. Dark side behavior is based on strengths overused. Behind every dark side behavior is some real positive, necessary, important. I mean, narcissists have some social skill. They have some. There we go. Psychopaths are quite charming. Paranoids are very insightful about organization. They know who's out to get them, and that's a good thing to know. So too much dark side will get you fired. Not enough dark side will get you overlooked. This is the fundamental principle of psychological personality assessment. There's good news and bad news at the high end and the low end. There always is. That's what drives simple-minded people crazy. They think high scores are better. No, high scores are just interpretable. They're not better. Sometimes low scores are better. It just depends on what you're up to. But it takes some nuance to play that game. Okay, so everybody has dark side tendencies. The more talented the person, the more you're like Rob Kaiser, the greater the potential dark side. But here's the big point. Power doesn't corrupt. Power reveals. It allows it to all come leaking out. Right, Jackie? So yeah, blah, blah, and blah. Okay. Second lesson, the distinction between identity and reputation. Good time. Identity is the story you tell yourself about yourself. It's the story you believe about yourself. What's this story about the guy who comes home from work and finds his best friend in the closet and his wife in bed? And he says to his best friend in the closet, "What are you doing here?" And he says, "Well, everybody has to be somewhere." So why do you have the identity you've got? Everybody's got to be somebody. But you probably ought to, think about it. So identity is the story you tell yourself about yourself. Reputation is the story that we tell everyone about you. This means that before every interaction, people already know a whole lot about you because you precede yourself. Identity is a weak predictor of performance. It's because your identity, the you that you know, is a story you made up. It's just, it's your story. And it only marginally, modestly correlated with reputation. Reputation is a powerful predictor of performance. The reason the five-factor model works is it's a taxonomy of reputation. It was developed based on factor analyses of other ratings. So the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. Your reputation is a summary of your past behavior. It's the best data source we have regarding your future behavior. So bad managers are happy with their identities and they don't care about their reputations. They don't care. They just, so the staff, however, always know who the good ones and the bad ones are, and they can tell you, as soon as you walk in the building, you say, "Who's the best manager in the building?" They'll say Fred or Susie. They always know, and then they'll say, "And stay away from the following 4 people." So, and just one more thing, and I hear in these talks, people talk about self-report data. Self-reports are not self-reports. Self-reports are identity signaling. Self-reports are identity claims. They're putting out a claim about their identity they hope you'll honor and validate. But what self-reports mean, you can't take self-reports at face value. Self-reports mean what they predict, said Paul Meehl, right? David? The meaning of self-reports is what they predict, not what they say. What are the external consequences of people who say these following things about themselves, who make these following identity claims? So the trick is to translate identity into reputation and then work from there. Okay, here we go. Lesson 3, emergence versus effectiveness. I think this Luthen's book, I don't think he knows what it says. It's a landmark study. He's a large group of managers, studied over a couple of years, bio data, observational data, assessment data, comprehensive data set, and at the end of 2 years, he wanted to see what makes for a good manager. And what he found was, criterion data, there were 2 categories of good managers. The first category was people who got rapid pay raises and rapid promotions and hot jobs, select jobs, the guys who talked a lot in meetings. And the second category were people who were running successful business units, who were running high-performing teams. The 2 groups only correlate slightly, about 0.3. So the important thing is so there's one group of people who are basically the hypos, and then there's a second group of people who are actually making you money. And how do they spend their time? The hypos spend their time in meetings and networking and on the phone. What's going on over there? Why wasn't I invited to that meeting? And the people who are making you money spend their time working on their teams. So it's 2 different activities, quite unrelated. So organizations typically promote leaders based on emergence, not effectiveness. As a PSYOP grandee told me once, well-intoned, lectured once, they got to emerge before they can be effective. Okay. So high-profile managers are often charismatic, but what? 65% of them are going to fail. So lesson 4, the myth of charismatic leadership. This is worth almost an entire afternoon's discussion, but I'll do it in one slide. Charisma is a dynamic presence, an appealing vision, and the courage to challenge the status quo. And so who's charismatic? Elon Musk, Steve Jobs, Donald Trump. These are poster boys for charisma. Charisma is significantly correlated with narcissism and with emergent leadership. And the correlation is quite robust. It's about as highly correlated as height and weight. It's a very significant relationship. Narcissists get to the top, and then they look great. They're gonna make this company great. They're gonna make America great again, and then they ruin organizations in the long run because of bad, self-centered, over-the-top decision making. So Collins' great book, he never understood the point of his own book. He actually didn't understand personality. He sort of didn't believe his data. But what he shows is that great CEOs, the really good ones, the ones that bring really substantial results, perform effectively, are humble but fierce about winning. Humble but fierce about winning. Humility is the opposite of narcissism. It's negatively correlated with narcissism. So charismatic leadership is a myth. Humble leadership is the real deal. So here's some guy, Robert Iger from Disney, who fixed Disney. Quite a humble guy and really well liked. Hubert Joly, the guy who fixed Best Buy. Larry Culp, the guy who's in the process of fixing GE. Alan Mulally, the guy who saved and fixed Ford, and after he left, Ford went back in the tank. Sergio Marchionne, the guy who saved and fixed Chrysler, and after he left. Ulysses S. Grant, the guy who saved the nation. Humble leadership guys. You don't hear about them because they don't self-promote. But they are, I mean, that's a Hall of Fame of winners. And what do they have in common, other than winning? That people. Grant was so good when he led from the front. He was absolutely fearless. He was the best rider in the Army. He's a little guy. He's a tough little fucker. And he had like 3 horses shot out from under him. So when he was riding in the front, when he was riding 200 yards just out of rifle range, the Confederate soldiers would cheer for him. Think about that. So now we're kind of building to a Shakespearean climax here. Life is about life is about competition, but there are 2 kinds of competition. There's competition. There's always competition within the group for status, power, resources, attention. It's who's in, who's out, who's up, who's down, who's the next CEO going to be, who's sleeping with one of the Kardashians, right? There's only one kind of sex to have. It's on the deck of your yacht with a starlet or star of your choice on worldwide TV, right? Other than that, it's fake sex. So there's always competition within the group for status, power, and control of resources. That's what goes on. That's the internal politics. And there's always competition between the groups for survival, which is what's going on in Ukraine right now. This is organizational effectiveness, and this is where leadership becomes absolutely essential. So, and this is the blind spot in leadership research. The blind spot is not distinguishing between competition within the group and competition between the groups. Okay? You with me? You got the distinction? Okay, here we go. The principal factor driving human evolution was warfare. The principal factor driving human evolution was warfare. And the losers in those, and it's constant, ongoing, never-ending, and the losers disappear from the gene pool, which is where the selective pressure comes from. Time 1, we're living in this part of the forest, they're living in that part of the forest. They decide they like your resources better than they like theirs, and then they come to see you. And when they come to see you about your resources, they don't come with their lawyers. And if they're successful, they don't kill you, they eat you. And if they eat you, you disappear from the gene pool. That's what selection is all about. So here's a fabulous quote from the Old Testament. When you capture, this is the Old Testament telling you how to behave. When you capture a city, put to the sword everyone. Utterly destroy them all. Leave nothing alive that breathes. As for the women and children, you may take these as plunder. That's reality. And that's why leadership matters. What does it say here? Yes, genocide and cannibal were normative in human prehistory. The level of trauma in Paleolithic bones is just unparalleled, and it's okay. So that's life is real, life is earnest. So emergent leadership concerns rising to the top and winning the within-group competition, but effective leadership concerns building a team and winning the between-group competition and staying alive and staying in business and staying employed and keeping the Russians out. Leadership, says Moi, is an evolved solution to the problem of organizing collective behavior for survival. You want to hear that again? It's an evolved solution for survival. That's why people have built-in categories for evaluating leadership potential. People know it when they see it. So this is, I would say, the most important. Leadership is a resource for the group, not a source of privilege for the incumbents. Boink. So how should we define leadership? Well, you should define it in terms of the ability to build and maintain a high-performing team. That's leadership. It's about putting a group together that can win, that can defeat the competition, the winners. Yeah. Leadership should be evaluated not by your boss, but in terms of the performance of the team. That's the only way to evaluate leadership. Performance of a team depends on how the team members react to the boss, the person in charge. Will people work for you because they have to? In the Navy, why should I do that? And the answer was always, because I have more stripes than you. Well, they can work for you because they have to, or they can work for you because they want to. It's the Nelson touch. People, will follow a real leader. Okay. So, he said, what else? So leadership is real, it's consequential. That whole thing about situational leadership was just a myth. When I started first, it takes a long time to get into a field. I didn't have time in my life to do leadership until about year 2000. To get into a new field, it takes you months. I mean, you have to it's like preparing for orals or something. You have to study your ass off. And what I discovered was that nothing was the case. In 2000, I can show you Edwin Hollander's Handbook of Social Psychology chapter on leadership. It's situational leadership. If you're there and it goes well, you were lucky. If you're there and it's called the shit happens theory of leadership. If you were there and it goes badly, yeah, tough luck, guy. There was no such thing as leadership. It was inconsequential, and for sure personality didn't matter because Walter Mischel told us it didn't. So, boom. So leadership is real, it's consequential, it's related to personality. It's consequential. The personality of the CEO accounts for more variance in firm performance than any other factor, including the topic, the field that they're in. Good leadership is pretty much the same within and across organizations and across cultures and across societies and out into the universe. Leadership involves creating follower engagement, getting people on board with the program. Dark side characteristics prevent 65 to 75% of existing managers from doing this. Charisma is related to narcissism. Humility is related to leadership. It's got to be humility with self-confidence. If you can't be, a weak brother or a weak sister, you have to know what you stand for. And bad leadership explains the great resignation. People don't always suffer in silence. So then, lost my last, they'll be here. So this is it. What does it actually look like? Let me make sure I said that. Yep. This is the last slide. See, that I can prove it. This is it. People respond. It's in the eye. Leadership is in the eyes of the beholders. It's from what the team looks like, and this is what people are programmed based on 2 million years of warfare. This is what they're programmed to look for in a leader. First, does the person provides appropriate structure and consideration? Do you tell us what we need to be doing, and support us as we try to do it? So it's the old Ohio State research from the right after World War II, which is valid research. It just wasn't sufficient. That was still a period of anti-personality. But structure and consideration are the foundation of the whole thing. Second, they keep their commitments. They don't lie. They don't cheat. They don't steal from the organization. They don't play favorites. They keep their commitments, and they remain steady under pressure, which they don't fall apart when the heat comes on, which means that people can trust them, right? So structure and consideration, direction, guidance, and integrity and resilience, so that you can rely. And then this is really important, and I promise you IO psychology doesn't understand this. They display expertise and good judgment. They know what they're talking about, and they make good decisions. And if you're in charge, people are going to be coming to you all day long for advice. How do I do this? And you've got to know what you're talking about. This is the problem with the myth of the MBA. The notion of the MBA is that there are these formal principles of management that if you know them, you can go anywhere and do it, and you don't need to know the content of the job. You do need to know. You need to know it from the... I just love this. One of my favorite statistics is during the Vietnam War, something like 5,000 junior officers in the Army were killed by their own troops. Because they showed bad judgment and didn't know what they were doing. And the troops knew that the officers were going to get them killed. It's kill or be killed. So he's in the latrine, boom. The troops will fight back if they can get away with it. Okay, so display actually, and then finally provide an attractive vision for the future. Why are we here and why should it matter? What's this all about? And why should we be doing this as opposed to something else? That's it. That's pretty much all there is to leadership. But it's from the perspective of the observer. And that's what it is. It's not about narcissism. It's not about charisma. It's about that. And I thank you for your attention. Est-ce que vous avez des questions? No? Yes, David. This is the world-famous David Lubinsky, guys. He can beat you at wrestling.
Bob, I was wondering, this isn't a political statement, but
This
I
time.
was wondering if you could comment on Brett Roberts' annual review chapter. He has a beautiful section in there, and he discusses some of the most vocal critics against personality seem to be the ones talking most about Trump's personality. And he really does an interesting thing in pointing that out. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts about that, or how that observation could be leveraged better to shine a light on the things you think are important here, which I happen to agree with.
Well, I probably won't answer it the way you want me to.
I don't have anything in mind.
No, my original field was personality psychology, and I just bailed on it. In about 1978, I decided that it was hopeless. And academic personality psychology is just committing suicide. And I said, we need to find a group. We need to find a market for personality research. That market will be I/O because they care about data, and they care about results, and they care about practical problems. So we made a self-conscious decision around in the late 1970s to join SIOP and start pushing. In addition, there were a lot of young people in SIOP at that time who would actually listen. You know, they're looking for so as of today, there's more and more interesting personality research going on in Division 14 than there is in Division 8. So that's what Brent's talking about. They've committed collective suicide. They've just shot themselves in the nether parts. So this is where personality psychology is alive and well. Those guys have all gone into, I don't know, little threes and big P's and so forth. They talk about big P, you know, one personality factor. For God's sake. Was that an answer? That's what Brent was referring to, I'm pretty sure. Yes. Wisely or widely? Well, I guess there are a couple questions there. I mean, do the scores change much, and can people change their behavior? This becomes a whole, you know, semester course. My favorite line is, if you want to change people, you need to change people. That's Scott Gregory's line, actually. That, yes, people change. Over time, they become more like themselves. Which is true. But I think, you know, this is my old, so how many psychologists does it take to change a light bulb? One, but the bulb has to really want to change. Well, can people change their scores? Well, they can change their behavior, but they have to really want to do it. And they usually have to be faced with kind of terminal career suicide before they'll do it. And then what's your line? 90%. What's your line about how much change does it take before anybody even notices it?
It's just simply the point that it's really hard to change behavior, and it's even harder to get anybody else to recognize it.
Yes, it's really. So, you know, Carl Rogers did this great study back in the 50s on evaluating. Psychotherapy is a much more intensive operation than executive coaching. So it's Q sorts, and they work with the client for a long time, intense psychotherapy, and did they change? Well, the client and the therapist agreed, using Q sort description, agreed that the client had changed a lot. The friends, the family, the employee, and coworkers, no change at all. It's just data. Okay, then. Yes, Mort.
Do you find that surprising, given that reputation builds up over a long period of time? Is it going to be?
It's almost psychometric, isn't it? I mean, it's just a reliability coefficient. Yeah, absolutely. But people really don't change. I mean, if there's real trauma, you know, they get hit in the head, if they have a terrible illness, if there's a change, if you see a significant change in somebody's personality, that's diagnostic. That means something probably bad has happened. So it's never good news when you see the change. Yes, sir.
What does divorce in society tell you?
The what?
Divorce.
Oh, what is divorce? People make really bad decisions. No, no, actually, there are certain areas of human performance where everyone thinks they're an expert and they're not. So everyone in the world thinks they have a great sense of humor. They don't. Everyone in the world thinks they're a great driver. They aren't. Everyone in the world thinks they're a great screw. They're not. Everyone in the world thinks they're great judges of character. And when at that I say, all you who've been through a divorce, take one step forward. It's about bad judgment. Yes, ma'am.
When you were talking about humble leadership, I had been just thinking previously when you said that if you're not sort of out there, you get overlooked. And so that seems sort of paradoxical.
It's the problem. What we do is try to teach the good ones some self-promotional skills, because there's a lesson you learned in grade school that's not true, which is do a good job and the teacher will notice. So you carry that forward with you into your career. I'll do a good job and somebody will know, they don't notice. So you have to develop some kind of self-promotional skills or you're done. But there better be some substance behind the self-promotion. Okay then, thanks for your attention.